This shop is an absolute mess. It's driving me nuts. Come on, guys. I need arms for this thing. Hurry up. Welcome back to the shop and another part of my General XP 1000 build. Today we're going to be going over something very important, and that would be fire safety. Polaris there for a while had a reputation for their vehicles going up in flames. And what a lot of people don't probably realize, I know it got to be a sort of a running joke for quite a while, but I remember Polaris issuing this apology saying, you know, that they acknowledged that it was an issue that was ongoing, and they were, you know, deeply apologetic for everybody that had been affected by it. And they had this whole big long press release. But then at the very bottom, it said, I'm not going to quote it, but it's going to be to the effect of, please don't carry fucking gasoline in the back of your side-by-side. What was mostly happening to majority of those fires is, yes, people were carrying gasoline in random sorts of containers. I don't know how many of them were roto packs, but for sure just regular old 5-gallon gas cans and strapped down in the back, and then they would be out running the machine around and sloshing gas out of the container, or even rolling it over and crushing the gas container and gasoline going everywhere, and poof, up it went. That was a large majority of that fire situation. In fact, our boy Jeremy Wallace just about lost his 800 his first time up Devil's Elbow with that little orange guy. He had gasoline strapped down in the back of it, and the container had come, let's say, unsealed. I don't remember exactly what happened, but anyway, while he was climbing Devil's Elbow, or attempting to climb it at least, gasoline was literally pouring out of the back of the machine and just running out of the back of it, just dripping on the ground. How it did not go up in flames, will forever remain a mystery. But I have personally seen one nearly go up due to spilled gasoline. Now, if you're going to carry gasoline, I highly recommend carrying it in the Rotopax containers, because they are more stout than your typical lawnmower can. But it's best not to carry gas if you don't have to. But either way, there was another issue of a bad batch of voltage regulators that had bad seals in them that was allowing water to get in it and causing them to short. And they were also the cause of a few fires. So it wasn't all gas. They did have a legitimate issue. And then there was an issue of the gasoline vent hose. At one point, they had switched the vent hose to the same vinyl tubing they use to vent the rest of the machine. And during assembly, that hose was getting pinched, and that was causing the gas tank to, when it would heat up, to expand, crack, and begin leaking gasoline out of it. So it wasn't all spilt gas, but that was a majority of it. There was a recall on that gas line, and they replaced it with a thick, heavy hose, and they're using that same hose even now. This one has it. I've already looked, and first thing I do when I get a new machine is see how they vented it. They used to just run a hose like in the front diff, and they'd loop it over the frame and just point it back down at the ground, and just left it that way, and that was a good way for contaminants to get down into the front diff. Well, what they've done now is a much better solution. They have clips that clip into a hole in the frame in various places, and the hose is connected to that clip, and then the clip has an elbow inside of it that is vented inside the frame rail. So unless you sink the machine in water up to that point, you're not really going to have to worry about vents. So don't carry gas, and they've already corrected the issues with the voltage regulator and the gas line, or the gasoline vent hose. So what's left? Well, there is the potential for debris to collect around the engine and an exhaust. This is going to be for any machine. It doesn't have to be a side-by-side, but you get enough dry leaves and dry grass packed in there, especially around that exhaust header, and that you could have a potential for fire. But most of the time, you're just going to smell it. You'll smell what's like a, like a campfire almost, or like burning leaves. Most people knows what that smells like, but you'll smell that long before it actually catches, and you can get that taken care of. Now, another issue that I have personally discovered, and I'm sure some of you are aware of this, or at least that it can happen. And it doesn't also affect side-by-sides or off-road vehicles only. I mean, it affects cars, just really any vehicle, from a motorcycle to a boat to an RV to a car. But mice or rats. After my 900 would have been flames, Progressive sent a fire inspector out to try to determine if the fire was caused by a manufacturer's defect. My Razor did have a recall on that voltage regulator, and it had been replaced once. So I made them aware of that. Said, well, it did have a recall on the voltage regulator. I'm not going to say that that's the cause of it, but it's a possibility. So they sent a fire investigator out to determine the cause, to see if this, like I said, was a manufacturer's defect. Well, now what he discovered was let's get some light on this subject here. The wire that went from the battery up to the winch, well, the bus under, on the firewall where your main power goes up to distribute to the machine, but also to the winch, that wire feeding that bus bar up there, right around in this section, had been, the insulation had gotten chewed off of it, and it grounded itself right there to the frame. And the battery was just pumping out so much power that the positive terminal melted down into a blob that actually sank down into the battery casing. It was pumping it out, and that was a lot of heat generated. But anyway, that wire was turned to dust in a section about that long. When he went to pick it up, it crumbled in his hands. But what he told me was something that I did not know, and I've been trying to spread the word, is that wire manufacturers, the insulation on low voltage wire, which is 12 volt and under, maybe 24 volt, I'm not sure about that, but basically general 12 volt automotive wiring, the insulation is made from soybeans. So yeah, the insulation on automotive and vehicle wiring, and any type of recreational vehicle just about, or automobile, is made basically from candy to a mouse. That's the reason that you find your trailer wires chewed on, your motorcycle wires, your RV wires, your side-by-side wires, they're chewed on because the insulation made of soybeans, which is follow the money, right? I mean, that's the reason. Follow the money. It's cheap. So in the interest of fire safety on this machine, I've done a few things differently. I had a fire extinguisher in my 900, but since I wasn't near the vehicle, I wasn't able to use it to put the fire out. By the time I found it, it was already to the point where I couldn't even see it because of the smoke. So that would have done no good. As a matter of fact, I think the fire extinguisher, when it exploded, nearly put the fire out, but the whole thing was already caught all the way up to the front. But while the fire department were on their way, and my neighbor had come over to help, we were spraying it with a water hose, which was doing nothing, to be honest. But At one point, I heard what sounded like an explosion, and the fire suddenly died down. It almost had been brought down to candlelight, and I'm like, what the heck just happened? But then it only took a few minutes for it to begin coming back. But I think at that point, since my fire extinguisher was on the back roll bar back there, it was too far gone anyway, but it did reignite. And then when the fire department got there and got on it, you know, they knocked it out in a couple seconds, but you know, the machine was already gone at that point. But that just kind of shows the effectiveness of what that could have done. So if I would have been nearby, could have grabbed that and started hitting it, and once it melted that plastic away a little bit, which would have been almost instant, that would have been your first key that it was on fire probably. But if you could have got that extinguisher material down inside of there, then you could have gotten it out. But there's still the issue of the battery feeding power to the ignition source, which was the wire grounded to the frame. So what I've done is put a power disconnect right here under the rear passenger seat, or rear driver's side seat. If you have a two-seater, your battery is going to be under your driver's seat, and you could do this same thing here. But this is a simple 90-degree rotatable battery cutoff switch that I got from Summit Racing. It's the way I picked this particular one out is it is advertised as being waterproof, which is important on an off-road vehicle, but also its amperage rating. It had the highest amperage rating of all the ones that they sell, or one of the highest. And the reason that's important is because your winch is going to have to feed through this as well. And so you want your winch to be able to get all the power it needs when you're in a recovery situation. So making sure, and believe it or not, a 12 volt, 4,000 to 6,000 pound ATV winch under full load can pull upwards of 200, 250 amps, which is quite a bit. That's more than your house pulls on a hot summer day. So make sure that whichever cutoff you get. Now in the description I'll list the model number of this particular one that I use, so it'll be kind of easier to help pick it out. But you can order it from Summit Racing online, is where I got this one from. There's not too many of them you can get from other places. I did find a couple from other, you know, side-by-side accessory providers, but this one to me just seemed like a good fit, so that's the reason I went with it. So what I did in the battery compartment is, first of all, I drilled this hole, and this handle comes off. Took the handle and put this in from the back side and then tighten this nut down. There's also a little pin on the face of that cutoff switch that you can drill another little small hole off to the side, and it's on this one. It's right here, this metal plate. I can feel that little pin sticking through. What that does is keep this thing from turning. So if you get on it hard, and this may not be enough to keep you from twisting it back and forth, and that pin will go through a secondary hole in the plastic to keep that from being rotated when you're flipping it back and forth. Alright, so with those done, I mounted it in here, and then I went to the automotive store and got just some stranded copper 4-gauge cable and some crimp-on copper lugs and some shrink wrap. I won't be able to show you the process because obviously this has already been done, but what I did is just cut a piece of that cable to go from this terminal on the cutoff just to the battery positive. Excuse me. But I took now also the crimp-on lug I used was a 3/8. That's basically the size I needed to go inside this battery terminal. But the factory one that was on here, the factory cable and my winch, or I call it a winch cable, but the line right here that goes up to the front of the machine to feed the bus bar, I took those loose and cut the ends off of them and put these are, I believe I used 1/2-inch lugs on this end because this is a bigger terminal. I used 1/2-inch lugs, crimp-on copper lugs, and attached them to the existing cables that went to the battery and put them on this side. And then everything else that needs power is also going on this side. This is the side that gets disconnected when I turn this off. So there's no power going to anything in the machine right now except this one little piece of wire, which is like maybe 6 inches long. It goes from here to there, and that's as far as it goes. So the wire that's these two fused wires, this ground and this 12 volt, are the wires running up to my rugged radio setup, which I'll go over when I do that video. There's another couple wires in here, and that's to my battery maintainer that I'm using here. I drilled a little hole in the plastic and put the plug for the battery maintainer here, and then I have a little cover that goes over it to protect these terminals. But that way I can plug this in with the seat all in the machine and not have to reach down in here to get to the battery, just to keep the battery, you know, topped up. So that, and the rugged radio wires, and the bus bar, and the main relay or solenoid here for the machine's 12 volt starter on the engine, all of that is being fed off this secondary lug, which right now has no power. So, but to put these terminals on properly, what I did is put them in a vise and crimp them down really good with a vise. And then I soldered them on the inside where the copper is actually crimped down inside the terminal. Now you can't use a soldering iron to do that, so let me go over there and to my workbench and I'll show you what I used to solder that. Alright, so what I got here is a little butane little torch, extremely handy for soldering small connections like this. I believe people use this for other nefarious purposes, but it's not what I use it for. But you simply, if I can remember how to operate it, yeah, push that little lock right there down, press it. It may take you a couple times, but I don't know if you can see it on the camera or not, but there's now a little blue flame coming out of it. But what I did was crimped the plug down into the vise and squished it really good, and then I raised it just above the vise and then closed the vise back on the wire right at the base of the fitting to act as a heat sink to help carry heat away from the terminal, away from the wire, so it didn't begin to melt the insulation below the terminal that I was trying to solder. And then I simply use this, and you got to kind of play with the distance. You don't want to get that flame right on it because you'll heat it unevenly and you'll have a mess. But you just heat that terminal up, and then you begin feeding solder to it. And you don't put the fire on the solder, you put the fire on the terminal, and then you put the solder on the copper, and then just hold it there. And when the temperature is right, the solder will then just suddenly begin bleeding into that copper and just fill that up, and you know you're good. You see some dripping out the bottom, and you've got enough in there. Well, that will make that connection permanent and waterproof. After I got it soldered and got it cooled down, the next thing I did was take a piece of shrink wrap, cut it so that it goes all the way up and covers the end of the lug where it's soldered with the copper wire, and then cut it a good inch or so below the bottom of the terminal, and then took that same little torch and carefully heated up the shrink wrap till, well, it shrunk all the way around the wire to further protect the connection. And then the final step is every wire in this machine that I have ran, or even was already here and didn't have a secondary jacket on it, I put it in wire loom as it runs through the machine. I don't know what wire loom's made out of. I think it's made out of nylon. Hopefully it doesn't taste good to the rodents. I don't think it does. I think that's its primary purpose, is to help protect wires from rodents and just general chafing. But some of the machines, or wires in the machine, were already protected by a secondary jacket, and these ones that are route through these harnesses are wrapped in this tough nylon material. I don't know if you've ever tried to tear that stuff with anything other than a razor blade, but it is very durable, and most of the wires are protected by that. The ones that weren't, like this heavy cable running up to the front to the bus bar, the wires that I added, even these little wires running that are already fused that are running up to the front to the radio, are wrapped in loom. And it's simply just, it's cheap stuff, and cheap as in inexpensive, and it's split, so you just feed it over your wires and put zip ties to keep it away from moving parts. Zip ties the ends closed, and it'll help protect all the wiring. So between doing all that, I mean, I've done what I can to, for fire safety. In the event of a fire, let's say that with it off, I'm not going to say there's 0 chance of this thing catching fire, but it has to be pretty close to 0. The only way it could catch fire now is if this short little wire was to somehow either come loose, either by a rodent or just come loose from neglecting to tighten it. But as you can see, it's good and tight. That tiny little wire right there would have to ground itself to metal. And there's not really, there's my phone ring, there's not really any metal in the vicinity that it can touch. This is plastic, all that's plastic, that's plastic. It's just surrounded by plastic. So even if it was to come loose, the chances of it arcing to metal are pretty slim because of the short length of that wire. Now with this engaged, the entire machine now has power. So everything is powered up, but anytime I'm going to be away from the machine for an extended period of time, I don't have time for the phone right now, sorry, then I turn the power off. Like if I'm going into the RV at night, I turn the power off. When it's out here in the shop, obviously I leave it off. If I put it in the garage in my house, you can bet it's going to be off. When I get out and go walk a trail, or I'm eating lunch, just generally using it normally through the day, I don't bother with it, I leave it on. But at those times, I'm always going to be fairly nearby within sight of it. If you see smoke, you start smelling something funny, first thing you do is kill the power in the machine and then grab your fire extinguisher and then stand at the ready, and then hopefully you can save it before it goes up. Now, obviously, if it's already gotten to the point where you can't get to your fire extinguisher and you can't get down here to kill the power, there's not much you can do at that point. But this is still better than not having any protection at all. So I did what I could, and making sure all the connections are good, tight, protected with the right kind of terminals. Even on the other connections I made that I didn't use soldering terminals, I used these crimp-ons that have shrink wrap jackets on them, and these work very well. Once you crimp this down and then shrink this terminal, you can, let's see, I did a test where I crimped it down and then pulled as hard as I could on the wire, and I was able to pull the wire out of the terminal. But then I took a little small heat gun and shrunk this shrink wrap around it, and then pulled on it and pulled on it and pulled on it till I was gritting my teeth trying to pull on it, and I could not pull the wire out of that terminal. So look for these to use on the machine when you're doing any wiring, because they work really well. There's also some that actually are solder-on terminals that work kind of the same way. You put the wire in there, you heat it up, and then the solder melts, and then you take the heat, you get the wire inside the soldered part, and then remove the heat source, and then you have a good connection there. But the problem with those is they don't have shrink wrap out on them. You'll have to go back and add that yourself, but these ones seem to work really well from what I've seen so far. Definitely better than the standard old style crimps, you know, with just a hard plastic shell around the outside that offers no protection at all. So just be careful with your wiring. Put everything in loom, put your disconnect on it, make sure you get a fire extinguisher or even two handy, one inside, maybe one outside, who knows. I haven't found a place outside for this machine, but I might do that still. But yeah, that's my spill on fire safety. I just been rambling for, I don't know, 20, 25 minutes, 30 minutes, I don't even know at this point. But anyway, that's what I got for you on this one. And it doesn't matter what kind of machine you have, if it's a side-by-side or just any vehicle, a boat, your RV, just anything running off a 12-volt battery. This is a risk, and you do yourself a favor to put something like this on it, just to keep it safe when it's in storage. That's the main point of this. If this thing went up in this shop, I'd probably be done. I mean, yeah. So just recommend it. You know, if you got like just any off-road toy that you can get one of these to fit on, then I would say do it. So. All right, well that's my safety tip for this week. I'm gonna get my cover back on here. I've already got the seats out because my seats that I've ordered for this machine have been shipped and they're coming in next week. So hopefully with the seats coming in and September getting close, Super will have those front arms out and I can finally start getting this thing rebuilt and back together. I'm tired of it sitting here like this, but there's not a whole lot I can do to finish putting it together without the rest of the stuff I need. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video, and do be fire conscious, please, because it can be a disaster, trust me.